this entire idea of it being this tool, because Jannie and I completely believe that everybody knows the answer to the questions that they're asking. They just need that bridge, that medium. And
Yeah.
so Jannie sometimes falls back on the book. I tend to do readings and sort of map it out with cards. And what I love most about this is there's literally no right or wrong.
Mm.
There's just options.
Yep.
Um, we do vibe checks occasionally on Instagram or when we're with an audience where we just read a single card per person and try and connect on that level, which is difficult online, but
Mm-hmm.
we really, really try and foster that safe space to put it simply. The fundamental goal with all of that is to create a space where someone can approach this deck and feel a little less crazy, feel seen, and hopefully open that door to self-love. If we've done that for anyone, then this is a success. That's what we've told ourselves from the beginning to the very end of time is this is a tool for self-reflection and love.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we are joined by two guests, a mother and son team who have partnered together to co-create a beautiful and unique deck of tarot cards that comes with a very detailed and helpful guidebook. Their names are Jannie Bowie Brown and James W. Brown IV. They've created the Sacred Web Tarot. And so Jannie and James, welcome to the show. Thanks for making time for us.
This is fantastic. I started a company called Spontaneous Productions, and now I'm on What If. It could not be more perfect for me.
It's it. The universe has aligned and brought us all together in the sacred web, right?
In the sacred web.
Yeah,
That's kind of how we roll.
That's it. All right. So I think a good place for us to begin is, can you each give us maybe a brief intro to yourself, kind of the work that you do, and then maybe together you can tell us a little bit about the background and the story to this deck of cards, because as we'll talk about in a little while, I'm sure it's very different from your typical tarot deck that you might go and pick up at the store with the normal images and things like that. So kind of like what's your story? What happened in your lives to kind of bring you to the point of creating this beautiful, unique deck of cards?
Well, since I'm the mom, I'm the elder.
That's right. We'll give you the baton first.
She gave birth to me. That's the beginning.
Mom goes first.
Goes first. So my background is I'm a lover of words, and I've been a writer for a long time. I taught English for a number of years as well, and then wound up moving to a very small town in Southwest Ohio, and had James with me, and then had James's two siblings. So then I was home with three kids, and started teaching physical movement and then studying yoga back in a time when there were like 3 yoga books. And for me to even take a yoga class, I'd have to drive an hour and 15 minutes to go find one in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I'm the kind of person who is constantly seeking, I guess, to understand the complexities of what it means to be a human. I think some of that comes from me becoming a mother and raising children. And then the tarot I actually came to the tarot before yoga, so late 1990s. And I found this beautiful round deck that was filled with just incredible images of women from different cultures. And it kind of stole my heart, the story of this idea for me of the soul, the zero, right? In the infinite void of possibility and the divine ocean of love, once you move through maybe the lens of yoga, and coming into a body and then being on this journey. And so it was really the narrative of the tarot that kind of stole my heart. And then my love of yoga and its gifts and practices of liberation and transformation kind of were woven together in this deck.
That's awesome. Yeah, what I've loved most about tarot is like seeing, like you said, the story that the deck tells, and like just how many of like the, I don't know, you want to call them like myths or whatever kind of stories that are kind of wired into us as humans pop up in those cards. Because like I told you before we record, like I grew up in the church. I went to Bible college, seminary, so I've studied the Bible for a long time. And I started to recognize once I got brave enough to pick up a tarot deck, because I was always told it's so evil and you're going to go to hell, you know, and all this different stuff. But when I started looking into it for myself, I'm like, wow, like some of these images, like the magician, the fool, like all these kind of images, these stories can be found in the Bible, in the teachings of Christ. And then there's other holy scriptures as well from like Buddhism and Islam. Like all these stories make their way into these cards. And I'm like so fascinated by how it's just everything is connected in that way in the sacred web. Right, there it is again. We'll just keep dropping that term.
It's pretty hard not to once you start, because
Right,
it's very applicable. Well, I'll just jump in.
Yeah, sure.
So my name is James Brown, which is awesome. I love it. I'm the fourth, which is even better. It's just the best built-in icebreaker. I never really was that spiritual. I went to Catholic school till I was, I think in 5th grade. We went to church every Friday, and it was terrifying because it would always give us a test after church. So it was this weird, like Pavlovian response to just being terrified.
Right.
And then I got out and just sort of, did the kids stuff, like made mistakes, loved school, science. And then I went to college and did not love it that much. So I found myself enamored with film, and I started a film company my sophomore year called Spontaneous Productions. And I did that, a lot of documentary work for about 6 years, moved to Denver in 2017, the year after I got married, and I cracked my skull. And that led to 3 to 4 years of just vague, vapid memory, like a lot of short-term memory just gone. And a lot of people have asked, did it come back? And the answer is no. Like it's just like some weird hazy dreams. And so over that period, well, let me take one step backwards. I have and always will be bipolar. And my mom and I spoke almost every day in college about it and explored these ideas and themes about pain, about existence, about just the difficulty of understanding the self, really, to boil it down. And so our conversations would start sprouting. I began writing and drawing a lot, but I was bad at it. I love science. I look into time theory very often. Cosmological natural selection is a beautiful theory. And so all these conversations with my mom just started mounting and mounting to these like 45-minute conversations when we were just calling to say hi. And so one Thanksgiving, when I'm still in recovery, I think it was year 2, maybe 3, 2018-ish, when we had a Thanksgiving, and my mom was drawing some cards, and she drew the death card. And as someone who had just
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, well, as someone who kind of like died and came back.
Yeah, really.
It definitely just prompted some questions, some conversation, and I drew it. And it's this really gorgeous flower wilting into a seed. And that's really what spurred this idea that why does death have to be scary? It's natural. It's everything. It's just as important as life. And so why would we try and create like a trap for the user to take their interpretations and just feel this burning anxiety because it's death?
Yeah.
And we turned the name into the release, and that's when everything changed. We realized we could, I think, the way that I've looked at it, because I know nothing about tarot, and I'm going to keep it that way. I like my open approach to this.
Yeah, sure.
But the way that I looked at it was, oh my God, I totally just lost the word that I had for it. But yeah, we wanted to create I call it the easiest on-ramp to tarot ever.
Yeah.
And Jannie and I just kept working. We only really talked about the majors together, which are these 20 cards on top of a card deck, and they all have incredible ideas. Like we took the Hanged Man and
Mm-hmm.
turned it into the Wheel, so
Mm.
nobody felt like they were going to get hanged that day.
Mm.
Well, we didn't turn it into the wheel. We turned it into reflection.
See,
There you
that's how
go.
good.
It's the 12th. I am the tarot nerd.
You're the
I'm the
Yeah,
tarot
yeah,
nerd. But yeah, I mean, just to I think probably the thing that was so profound to me is
Mhm.
actually when James physically, drew the image for the death card and sent it to me. And it's just so beautiful. It's this,
Mm.
and I, that's what that card has always meant to me. It's been this invitation to let go of something that is blocking whatever is meant to grow,
Yeah.
right? That's keeping me stuck in a place. And that's when I was like, oh man, I think we're going to make a tarot deck. But the other thing I would say is like, through the experience of watching James work so hard to address his mental health issues, having struggled myself with mental health issues for many, many decades, this understanding that being human is challenging. It is difficult to be in a body,
Mhm.
and that each thing, the hardest things, the shadow, if you will, the unrealized things, those are the great teachers.
Mm.
So where I saw James suffering with the head injury, I also saw him growing incredibly. So for us with this deck, we wanted to make sure, because we don't think there are any scary cards. But the people I work with traditional decks, they pull the devil or death, and they freak out, or the tower, for goodness sakes. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, it's good. It's good.
Right.
Let's think about this. Like, just sit with it. And so that's where some of the language changed around the names for the cards.
Yeah.
And then, James had, go ahead and, why is it a non-binary deck?
yeah.
Yeah.
So we only talked about the majors, and
Mhm.
then I gut instinct drew everything else. I mean, it gave it 3 layers of interpretation. My narrative.
Mhm.
So one of the Earth cards has a monkey, and to me that was Curious George. And
Love it.
now it's part of the Earth stew and interpreted through that lens, and then it's interpreted through your lens.
Mm.
So while we were working on this, there's the knight, king, queen,
Mhm.
prince area, and we were just talking. I was like, wait, my sibling's non-binary.
Mm.
Why the hell would we stick to this weird hierarchy?
Right.
Like, it's a hierarchical system
It's
as
true.
well. It's not
Yeah.
just gendered. It's like you're powerful, less powerful, and
Yeah.
now you're,
The
a
man,
gender.
the woman. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
And so I just brought that up one day, and Jannie's response was like, ooh. And she comes back with the cosmic family, is what we call it. And Jannie, I
Mm.
don't know if you want to do a quick run through it.
Well, thank you. That was one of those moments when the deck started to like speak to me and
Yeah.
wanting like wanting to be a space where no matter what you look like, how you refer to yourself,
Mhm.
what religious beliefs you bring, you are welcome here.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of the sacred web. And
Yeah.
and even this idea of like, you don't even need to know tarot to work with this deck, because there's language for each of the cards if you'd like to work with that, an energetic word, a mantra, I call it, just
Mhm.
coming out of my yogic background. And so you could just pull a card and it's an affirmation. It's just an opportunity to be really present with yourself.
Mm. I love that it gets rid of the like polar opposites of things and kind of brings everything together. And like we were saying before about like death, like that. My father died in March, and so it's been like a
Oh,
really
wow.
heavy season for me. That was like my first real significant loss, I guess you could say. And I recognize that like growing up in the church, I was always taught that, you have to put your feelings aside, you gotta push everything down, especially as a pastor, because you've got people that are relying on you in the pews. So give yourself a week to grieve your things and then kind of move on with your life. And so that's always how I've handled my grief, is just stuff it all away and move on. So this is the first time I really opened myself up to like, you know what, like I'm really gonna feel everything I've got to feel. And like, I even stopped the podcast for April, May, June, July, August. I picked it back up in September and started to, do everything again. And just even then it was like slow, like bi-weekly instead of weekly. But I'm still like in this place of like wrestling with this grief. But everything I've been taught has been like, that's bad. Death is bad. Death is like this separate thing. But now I'm in this place where I'm like, well, what if it's just, what if the separateness is just an illusion? Like, what if it's all really just connected? I've been reading like a lot of like Buddhist teachings about death, and they talk about how like it's like we're like a wave, and we manifest out of the ocean for a little while, but then the wave crashes on a rock and it goes back into the ocean from which it came. It doesn't cease to exist. It ceases to be a wave, but it's still the ocean. It's still the water. And so now I'm trying to think of like life in that kind of a sense where it's like we manifest out of the water of the divine or whatever, the ocean of the divine for a little while, and we crash eventually upon a rock. Some people crash against cancer, some people crash against old age or whatever it might be, but we don't cease to exist. We're still here. It's just all part of that web. And that's what I love about this deck, is because as I've been wrestling with those kind of things with my own theology that I was grown up with, and just, the loss of my dad, I feel like this deck has really spoken into all of those things that I'm thinking about. So thank you to both of you for having the courage to kind of put this together.
I mean, we've never actually brought this up, but during the process, first of all, incredibly difficult. And I lost my grandpa during my recovery, and I remember to this day just a few things. Uncontrollable sobbing. I tried to get on an airplane as quickly as possible to see him. I mean, I'm named after the guy. I really, really loved him. And over time, I've really come to turn those ideas of grief into the idea of keeping him alive.
Yeah.
Like, my memories, my actions represent the man, and I give credit where I can. And that alone, we also have a giant side. My dad's side of the family is giant. It's like 40 plus people. So, but it's become almost a fallback, a reminder of why I do what I do, of what I want to do. And when we were working on the death card, I was still struggling with that. And I think very subconsciously, the idea of one thing changing into another is exactly what you're talking about. I keep telling my family, like, if you guys can figure it out, throw my ashes in a SpaceX, whatever, send me to space. Like, I'm done down here. I want to go home. I want to go to the stars, man. We're all stardust. So
That's
I
right.
hear you on that. And I really, really hope that, the grief can turn into a kind of a weird form of love. That's probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I feel like it's up and down, it's all over the place, and just trying to kind of embrace the moments and what each day brings, and take it one feeling and one moment at a time, but not push anything away. I think that's the beauty of this deck, is you're not pushing away the bad feelings. You're embracing them as this is just part of the story, and this is part of life, and this is where we are, and it's not bad. We can learn from it. We can grow. So anyway, thank you. But what I want to ask you next is, in the intro of the book, you say that you believe that it's good to honor the tradition of tarot. And James, I thought that's interesting, because you said that you have purposely not gotten really deep into tarot. So it's kind of like you leave it over to your mom to do the kind of more of the technical things. But you also believe it's important to expand on tarot as a tool for growth. And I love that, because really that's what we try to do here on the podcast. Is I believe the traditions of Christianity, the tradition of a lot of religions, are really, really good. But I think we can easily get stuck there, and we can almost go backwards when we get stuck. And so I think it's good to expand on things, which is why I've invited people on the show like yourselves to talk about tarot. We've had astrologists on the show. Mediums have been on the show before. Like, we just go all over the place and talk about all sorts of the taboo things. But I think it's important to kind of layer those things into our faith and expand on it. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, what does that look like in this particular deck for people who maybe haven't gotten their hands on it yet? Like, how has this deck honored the tradition of tarot, but yet expanded it at the same time?
Well, I'll go, just because that was my mission, I guess, if you will, is to, I love I mean, it's so interesting when you think about it, you know, the origin of tarot was
Mhm.
just a deck of cards. It was a playing game, you know,
Yeah.
whether it's Germany or Northern Italy, you know, there's a little debate about where it first started, but um, in the 1400s, and then, you know, in the 19th century, then it became kind of woven into spirituality
Mhm.
and spiritual exploration. And so in this iteration of it, where the narrative became sort of the sacred center of tarot, if you will, the big story of the soul and the major arcana of those 22 cards that begins with the 0 and ends with, we say, the universe and not just the world, because
Mhm.
we're everything is connected,
That's
right?
right.
Stars as well as the stars above.
And the sacred self, the 79th card we added.
We did.
Mm.
We did add an extra card there. So that traditional story of what it means to be human, I find incredibly fascinating.
Mm.
So I wanted to explore that deeper. And when I started to work within the minor story, which is the 4 suits of earth and water and fire and air, I, as a yoga teacher, was like, wait a minute, these are the chakras. The root
Mm.
chakra is earth, the sacral chakra is water, the solar chakra is fire, the
Mm.
heart chakra is air. And when I thought about that, and I was like, wait a minute, the scariest cards are the swords.
Mm.
Those are the hardest ones, you
So is
know.
swords going through people, or like
Yes,
laying down,
through
look at they're
hearts.
dying,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, yes. Just like right above you, waiting to, you know, to come down and strike you.
Right.
And I was like, wait a minute, if the swords, the suit of air, is about how we think and communicate our ideas and our sort of sense of self and
Mhm.
what we know, our brain patterns, you name it, whatever goes on mentally. And then we say, but wait, but the element of air is also the element of the heart. What if we think about aligning all of the things that move through our brain with our heart?
Mm.
When we do that, I feel like we come into this spaciousness around how to be with our own thoughts,
Mm.
which, as James knows, I'm always like, the brain is the least reliable narrator, you know?
Right.
The body
Yeah.
is the better narrator. The body never lies. And so it was kind of through that lens of yoga where I was like, oh, this is another way to shift
Mhm.
and expand how we can work with these cards, which really is just a way of working with ourselves, because
Mm.
the cards are, you know, just basically mirrors or little doorways to step through into a deeper understanding of who you are.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love the inner work that can be done with these cards. That's what I found is, again, like growing up, I was told tarot is this evil thing. It's predicting the future. It's doing all this stuff. And I'm like, let me get my hands on this stuff and really kind of see what it's like for myself. And what I found is like it doesn't show you anything that isn't already there. Like it's almost like just helping you peel
Yeah.
back like a veil of some sort that maybe,
Yes,
right, has just been covered
yes.
up because of your baggage and the things in your world. You're like, oh, like it's been there the whole time. But this card or this story and this card is just helping me see something that my intuition hasn't been able to tap into until it's almost been awakened by this image on the card.
And that's what I tell every person. So when I say I don't know anything about tarot, I know
You know, a
enough.
little bit.
Yeah.
He's
I
he's a
guess
very intuitive reader, and
she calls me a card slinger.
cards.
Love it. You're like a card shark.
Yeah, I'm just like, this is probably what's going on in your life, and I get too personal. Um, so for me, when it came to this practice of tarot, I mean, I've been around it my whole life, basically, with Jannie. Um, I wanted to break down almost every single stereotype and hang up to make
Mhm.
it boiled to what feels like a Rorschach test. When
Mhm.
I'm reading, I draw the cards and they never look the same, which is
Mm.
creepy to me because I drew them. But this entire idea of it being this tool, because Jannie and I completely believe that everybody knows the answer to the questions that they're asking. They just need that bridge, that medium. And
Yeah.
so Jannie sometimes falls back on the book. I tend to do readings and sort of map it out with cards.
Mhm.
and what I love most about this is there's literally no right or wrong. There's just options.
Yep.
We do vibe checks occasionally on Instagram or when we're with an audience where we just read a single card per person and try and connect on that level, which is difficult online, but we really, really try and foster that safe space to put it simply. The fundamental goal with all of that is to create a space where someone can approach this deck and feel a little less crazy, feel seen, and hopefully open that door to self-love. If we've done that for anyone, then this is a success. That's what we've told ourselves from the beginning to the very end of time, is this is a tool for self-reflection and love. That's why we did it.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I think that's so important for especially people who come from the tradition that I'm from, that it's a very evangelical, fundamentalist tradition where, I was told growing up that the inner voice is one you don't listen to, because it's going to steer you wrong. There's a verse in Jeremiah that was always taken out of context, but it says the heart is deceitful or wicked above all things. And that one verse was kind of lifted from the story of Jeremiah, thrown into my young mind as a teenager. And it's just told, your heart is always going to lead you astray. You're going to follow your sinful nature. You're going to go here, you're going to go there, you're going to go away from God. So you've got to look back to the Bible, or you've got to look back to the pastor who's the one who's listening to God, or the professors, whatever. And that's where you get your guidance from. So really, for a long time, I just kind of shut down that intuitive voice inside, because I would always think that's the devil whispering in my ear if it's something that's contrary to what somebody else is telling me, So now I'm in this place though, where I'm trying to awaken that voice. And for the longest time, I would take, a tarot card, because I got into it about a year ago. And for months, I would just look at the card, like, I don't know what in the world this card is saying. And, I didn't hear anything inside, and then I started to read some books about what people said about them. Like, oh, I guess I can see that. Then I started to look at them more without the books. Now I start to feel like I'm feeling things inside again. I feel like I'm hearing that voice. I'm trying to befriend that voice instead of trying to cast it out, which is really what I was doing for the longest time. I was trying to cast it away. And now I'm giving it an invitation to come and kind of sit at this table and help me understand the things, like you said, James, like the answers that we're looking for. We know them, they're there. And that voice inside can often lead us to it if we could just learn to listen to it. So for our listeners who grew up in that same kind of tradition, I think this is a wonderful deck, like we've been saying, to kind of get started, if for nothing else, that happened to that voice that we've been told to shut up and not listen to for most of our lives.
That's
That was really well said.
beautiful. Yeah. And I totally agree. And I think one of the things, if you're new to tarot, and this deck, actually, it very intentionally, we really didn't put the names of the cards even on the cards, to just to remove any prejudice or preconception, so that you can just be with it and work with yes, we believe tarot is an incredible tool for self-reflection and presence and centering yourself in your day and your life, but it's also just an amazing tool to develop that intuitive muscle that's there, like as little kids, that's who we are. We're not really even separate from that inner knowing. And as we grow, when we become separate from it, and that separation, I would agree with you, is an illusion. It's just like the illusion of separation from divine. Like somehow, divine comes down through just one pastor and then out through a church, versus divine is everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've been I just had somebody on the show last week. We were talking about this very idea. And we talked about how, like in the Christian tradition, or in the Jewish tradition as well, in Genesis, it says that, God breathed into Adam. And so if Adam is representative of all of humanity, that means that God's breath is in all of us. Excuse me. And that breath is what keeps us connected. That's the thing that connects us. So if I could look at James, for instance, I could see three things. I see James, but I also see God, because God's breath is in James, but I also see myself, because God's breath is in me and in James. And so I see us together as one. And so if we could look at all of each other like that, we could see how we're all so connected in so many ways. Imagine the problems that we could resolve in our individual lives, our family lives, our society, our culture, all those different things. But I think that interconnectedness piece, that's the starting point.
Yeah. I call that like looking at the world through the eye of the heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
If the heart has this eye, and in yoga, the heart, the anahata, is that word to describe heart. The heart chakra is not struck. It can never be struck because it's perfectly whole.
Yep. That's right.
And if we see that through that lens of wholeness, right, then that's how we see others.
That's right. That's
quite a
so
beautiful
good.
practice.
That's
And
so good.
the difference between Jannie and me is I try and bring, some sort of science or metaphysics into this, where it's like energy is never created or destroyed. Our brains are electrical signals. They're
Yep.
constantly, there's a lot of evidence out there that there is a baseline psychic nature to people. It's that gut instinct when you feel something's off about someone,
Yep.
or you feel attracted to someone. I don't know what it is. It could be wavelengths. It could be signals. It's energy. Where does it go? What is it? So this is what leads us down the rabbit hole of 45-minute conversation
Yeah.
before we get back to the next project we're working on or something.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. So what would you suggest to the person who they're new to tarot, or maybe they already have a deck, like I have a couple decks, maybe would be their first deck. But what's your suggestion when somebody gets this box? So the first thing I did, not knowing what it was going to be, is I got it. I looked at the cards and I'm like, oh, this is very different from what I'm used to. And now I feel like maybe I shouldn't have gotten this. That was my first thing. Maybe I'm too deep in the weeds or too deep in the water and I can't swim. But then I started to read the book and I'm like, oh, like this makes a lot of sense to me now. So what would be your suggestion for somebody who maybe they're going to go order this, they're going to get it, it's going to come in the mail, they're going to unwrap the plastic. What's the first thing they do? Should they look at the card? Should they look at the book? Should they not use the card so they read the book? Like, what's your recommendation for that?
It's a really good question.
Really simple how-to stuff, because that's what people are going to ask me.
Yeah. I think it's about the intention. If you want to learn as much as Jannie, then I would start with the book. Yep. Because she knows a lot. It feels like a book of poetry, in all honesty.
Yeah, and it's a thick book for our listeners. I mean, it's not like a little book that sometimes comes with a deck. Like I'm holding it here. It's a thick book, so there's a lot in there.
Yeah, and those webs took over 30 hours to make on that book. So
Oh,
yeah, we really went into the web game. If you're really just new and kind of curious, go through the cards, see which ones you like, and then go to the book if you want to, or just sit with them, pull one a day and say, oh, that's making me think of this, or that's making me realize I'm feeling like this. My mom and I both do that practice where we'll pull a card to do a gut check, is what I call it for me. I'm checking my gut. I'm like, how am I actually feeling? What am I thinking about? And I don't go to the book. When I do readings, I will go to the book or offer the book. But so I think that's the way that I would approach it, is your intention. If you're really afraid of it, just enjoy it. It's pretty art. It can help you think. They're great stories. If you want to get into the more spiritual side of it, that book is one of the greatest resources out there. And I think it deserves a lot of recognition because it breaks it down in ways that are so obvious. Like the shadow and light aren't on diametric opposites. They are the yin yang connection. They are intertwined. So I just think there's a lot there that can offer hope, insight, and a lot of love. And if that's what you're looking for too, we got you, and we're always here for anyone who wants a reading or just wants to talk. That's what we're here for. That's our job.
That's so good.
Well said, James. Yeah, I would say, one, trust yourself. Like just sit with whatever resonates. I have a teacher who talks about the resonance of yes in the body. Like, and the resonance of no, and listening to like where you feel moments of yes. And there's some practices you do to kind of tune into that. But I love that idea of like, what is the resonance of yes for you with this deck? And just and then exactly as James said, there are some simple and a little more complicated spreads that I offer in there. Offering spreads on Instagram, and I have a blog too. So lots of, if you wanted to get deep into it, but I love the idea of doing a personal vibe check for yourself, maybe at the beginning of the week, if it feels too overwhelming to do it once a day, or just, keep them out there so that when you are ready, they are there for you.
Yeah. Now, what does that, I mean, people might ask, like, what does it look like for you to do a gut check with the cards? Like, you act like we know nothing. Like, what does it look like when you take out the cards? Like, do you talk to the cards? Do you talk to the universe? Like, what is it that you're asking? And like, what does it look like for you to kind of break the deck, do all those kind of things?
Well, I'll tell you, I drew a card for our little conversation today,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the Three of Earth,
Mm,
which is a card of community,
Mm-hmm.
mhm,
a card that helps us understand that all work is sacred and holy,
Mm-hmm.
and that in community we grow because we're there to support each other. And I was like, is this the perfect card for a podcast where three people are good? Yes.
Right? Perfect.
So, that just struck me as like, wow. And I do feel like that's how the deck works for me, is like whatever I need that day, it kind of shows up. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's easier than others. And it's just yeah, that's
Yeah, and sometimes it comes through as like an affirmation almost, right? Like I
yes,
think like that
exactly.
card, right? Like that card is
Exactly.
almost like a nod from the universe that yes, this conversation is a good thing to engage in, so throw yourself into it. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's the pat on the back that you need, right? Because there's a lot of times, all the time, I mean, really all the time, I'm always second guessing myself, like, should I be doing this or whatever? But sometimes I'll pull a card and it's just that pat on the back that I needed, that, like, yeah, like whether it's God, the universe, my dad, whatever it is, somebody's telling me, yes, like just take the next step.
Yeah. And you're not, as James said, you're not alone.
That's right. Yeah.
You've
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important. So last question then, on that, pigging on that not alone piece, you talk about how in the book that I think you said the goal of this deck is to scrub away the illusion, I think, of isolation. And I love that phrase. Like I've been thinking about that, the illusion of isolation. I'm wondering if we could dig a little bit deeper into that, because we talked about how the cards can kind of do that for us. But practically speaking, like if we remove that feeling of isolation, we recognize it's just an illusion. We recognize our interconnectedness to each other, to all things. Like, what are some things that you've maybe seen change in your own life, individual lives, maybe in the life of your family? And what do you think could really happen in our world, in our society, in our culture, if we can really wrap our minds around that whole piece of interconnectedness, and that this whole idea of isolation, of light, darkness, black and white, it's really not real. It's not reality. It's just an illusion. What are the practical things around that?
I think
That's such an ironic part of it, though, is we live in a world where people say we're more connected than ever.
Yeah.
And yet it's a vapid illusion of connection, and yet we
Yep.
have an illusion of isolation. So how do we bridge those two areas?
Yeah.
Um, in my life, uh, I've become more patient.
Mm,
That's the big thing for me, was working on patience, rolling with the punches.
mm-hmm.
I recognizing that all I can control is my reaction, and what defines that control are the principles that I've learned from my grandpa and dad and
Mm,
mom. So that sort of has been great over the past 30 years, just sort of fostering these baseline ideas and then turning them into my own.
yeah.
And as we do that, the family reacts and it changes dynamics. I've never been closer with my father, and I wake up every day so happy
Mm,
that we've gotten to this point. And it took a lot of work, but when a family wants to be a family, you push and you make it. You really put in the work. And I think that that's been the biggest sort of like shift, I
Mm,
guess, over the
yeah.
past few years on my end.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good. I love that, James, because I do think, it begins with the self,
Hmm.
right? And the more you can attend to your own wounds, right, and work on coming into a sense of connection to yourself,
Yeah.
right, then you can, and finding that love for yourself, that self-compassion, really then you can bring that energy back into the world. And it's
Yeah.
true that, when you heal yourself, everybody you interact with is better off for that work that you've done. But I would also say the other thing to me around this illusion is,
Hmm.
when we let go of judgment, and there traditionally is a judgment card in this
Yeah.
deck, and I that there's no judgment in this deck. Everyone is welcome. And so we renamed that awakening.
Mm,
And the mantra for that card is communion. When we awaken, when we can commune with ourselves in a loving, kind way, and when we can be in communion with others in
mm,
that way. And then all of a sudden, like you said, I look at you and I see the divine,
mhm.
and I see myself, and therefore the illusion is scrubbed away.
Yeah. Yeah. What is that higher? You just mentioned the self, the inner self, higher self. And James earlier mentioned that there's that 79th, I think 79th card. Is that how many cards there are, right?
Yep.
And you added
Yep.
that card to the deck. What was the intention behind that particular card being in this deck?
When I remember when I was working on that one,
Hmm.
it's definitely a layered series of meanings. There's actually a blindfold on a non-binary individual with a third eye on their forehead. So that part was trying to show that you don't have to see everything to believe in yourself,
Mm,
to have that internal dialogue that you're talking about, to have that sense of trust that you can be in a pure void, but still be you. And then around it is some scattering of the character, the breakdown
mm,
into the ether, the universe itself. And that to me is a sign of interconnectivity. I mean,
mm.
if we're related to stars and moons, like we're connected to everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that to me is just one of the most beautiful concepts that I just love. I don't think it even inspires me or changes me. I just love it. This
Yeah.
idea that we're all connected because we all came from the same place. It's
Yeah.
a web, it's a brotherly God spirit. Like I remember that in Catholic school. I was like, oh, whoa, maybe no one should be mean if they're all brothers and sisters. I was a child, but
Right.
that was a very obvious answer to me. And as we've grown in this world, I think there's a lot of avenues of the illusion of connection that have divided us even more. And
Yeah.
again, the almost poetic irony of it is unfortunate. It's scary. It's palpable. And our goal over the next however long it takes is to create a space where people can just be themselves.
Yeah.
It's not about really, it's about you and being
Yeah.
seen and being heard. And we're still trying to figure out all the ins and outs of bringing that space on a digital platform,
Yeah.
much less in real life. And so um, it's tough, but
Yeah.
it's possible. And I think the 79th card says, go back to your roots, go back to yourself, go back to that interconnectivity between all of it and try and rely on that rather than the illusion of connection.
Right. That's right. I love it.
Good.
Well, my friend, we are just about out of time. We're nearing the end of our 45-ish minutes, but thank you for taking time to join me. Thank you for this deck. I feel like my brain is like exploding with things to think about. So I feel like we have to have another conversation because this interconnectivity idea is brand new to me. Like I'm talking like last 6 months or so. And it's
Mm.
just really blowing my mind in a lot of different ways. So things you're talking about, James, with the science behind it, those are things I'm like, tell me more about that because I don't understand it, but it's very intriguing. And I feel like it's a key that could unlock a whole lot of stuff if we could really tap into it. So Thank you for taking the time to join me. And really quick, where can people go to find you both online? Like, what are some places where people can go to interact with you? I know you do some of these cards and stuff like that on Instagram, things like that. So where's the best place for people to go to dig in a little bit more?
Well, for the deck
Mhm.
at the Sacred Web Tarot on Instagram and Facebook, and then it's www.sacredwebtarot.com. We have some fun things coming.
Yeah, we do.
We
Oh
have
boy, fun.
we have a very special calendar that has all brand new artwork. And I've pulled a card for each of the full and new moon. And so you have mantras to work with, and
Fun.
they're little separate sheets of calendars, so you can put them on an altar or whatever. But so yeah, check it out and reach out, because we're happy to connect. And then James, you have share yours.
Yeah, I've been taking a break, some would say. I'm getting ready to launch a store. I am at Spontaneous Productions.
Mhm.
We're gonna have some weird shirts with a lot of anatomy on it. We're gonna have some great shirts with some flowers. I'm working on Optimus Prime right now.
Excellent.
Yeah, man, that's my dream. And if anybody ever wants a piece or just to talk, I'm there too. I would
Awesome.
recommend Sacred Web though for today.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that's great. And for our listeners, please take them up on that, because I mean, usually when people come on, like they'll give their handles and stuff like that, and it's you don't always get that interaction with people. But I really sense from just I've been looking at you guys online and stuff like that, I really get the sense that you interact with people, which I think is really important, especially when these kinds of things and this kind of conversation, this kind of deck of cards can bring up so many questions that people might have. It's great to be able to go to the source of the people who made it and be able to ask a pointed question and know you're going to get a thoughtful response in return. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a
What a
blast. And
treat.
I really want to get back to talking, man. I'm sure we could have a great time.
Yeah, we'll definitely do it again. We'll definitely do it again soon. And I'll be in touch.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so
you.
much. And to
Take
everybody,
care.
don't forget.
Absolutely.
What if?
That's right.
Yeah.